The blood gets all the credit for the fluid responsibilities in the body. Prized in scientific and supernatural circles, the blood is what most people think of when words like circulatory, circular, white blood cells, and fluid is mentioned. Perhaps it is the elusive nature of the lymphatic system that has given it a backseat in the public eye. Perhaps it was a seemingly uninteresting scope. Perhaps just laziness. In recent years, with technological advances and new minds coming into medicine, more is known about the lymphatic system and more questions arise than ever before. One thing we are coming to understand is that the lymphatic system invades and plays a vital role in all facets of life. It is interdimensional and at least a secondary support system to all the systems in the body. The lymphatic system is composed of a network of vessels, lymph nodes, the thymus, tonsils, spleens, adenoids, bone marrow, and in tissue components throughout other organs. But it is its dynamic role with the liver that we will be covering more in depth in this presentation. Investigating the lymphatics and liver's multifaceted role in cardiovascular, digestive, and immune system homeostasis, with an emphasis of the lymph system and liver's amazing capacity for healing the body and promoting general health through integrated modalities. The lymphatic system, given its broad spectrum of networks cascading through tissues, organs, and other systems, makes it extremely difficult to observe its all-amazing, vast encompassing network, and much of what we draw on from an anatomical perspective has been pieced together through small-scale observations of countless individuals. The lymphatic vessels are composed of fluid, known as lymph, that is clear milky fluid composed mainly of blood plasma, proteins, and interstitial fluid. The fluid loss that occurs post-mortem makes the vessels lose its structure, giving rise to the difficult nature to study. The advancements of technology have allowed more living observations to be, and even post-mortem techniques developed to help the vessels retain better structure for assessment. The web-like nature of the lymphatic system is identical to the weavings of the cardiovascular network of blood vessels and the nervous system's extensive invasiveness through the whole body. The lymphatic system vessels runs superior from the posterior inferior cephalic, transversing distally to the hands and feet, with the lymph nodes extending up until the elbow and knee joints. Through hematopoiesis, we see the cells differentiate and mature. This becomes multipotential hematopoietic stem cells. These cells differentiate into myeloid progenitors or lymphoid progenitors, where they will further differentiate. From myeloid lineage, the cells can become megakaryocytes, erythrocytes, mast cells, and myeloblasts. Basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, and monocytes derive from the myeloblasts. These myeloblastic cells predominantly help within the cardiovascular vessels to promote immune responses, but as we will investigate, can cross over into lymph vessels, especially in regards to the myeloblasts, which further mature into macrophages, a lymph system-dependent cell. Through the lymphoid lineage, we differentiate between the large granular lymphocytes and small lymphocytes. Small lymphocytes will become our T, B, and B cell-derived plasma cells. So lymph vessels are endothelial-lined, narrow passageways where lymph travels. Superior to the endothelium is a thin layer of smooth muscle which is inferior to the connective tissue lining encasing the whole vessel. The connective tissue helps to anchor the vessels throughout the body. Lymph vessels are layered within the endothelium to create unidirectional valves throughout the vessels, even extending into the smallest lymphatic capillaries. Nervous tissue connects to the sparse locations of the lymphatic vessels in the outer connective tissue adventitia of the vessels. These nerves have been observed to be almost completely unmyelinated. However, some Schwann cells in the adventitia have been discerned. Each lymph node is remarkably similar in structure to the kidney. These mini filtration hubs are kidney-shaped structures that are encapsulated by fibrous connective tissue. Afferent lymph vessels carry lymph fluid to the node, which travel through an inner sinus network that pass lymph fluid from the superficial subcapsular sinus to the medial cortical sinus, finally to the innermost medulla sinus, where it collects in the hilum and exits via the efferent lymph vessels. The sinus tissue is composed of simple squamous epithelium housing macrophages and lymphocytes. The cortical sinuses are enriched with T cells, B cells, macrophages, and dendrites. Within the germinal centers inside the subcapsular sinus, B cells undergo activation and proliferation. Capillaries carry additional blood into the lymph node via postcapillary arterioles and away via simple cubital venules. Connected through the lymph vessel network with larger clusters of lymph nodes protectively centered in the armpits, chest cavity, and groin. And unlike the blood system, it relies on the body's natural movements to propel fluid through the body rather than the pumping of the heart, in which lymph flows towards the bilateral subclavian veins where the lymph is reintroduced into the bloodstream. The right lymphatic duct drains lymph from the upper right quadrant of the body, where the left lymphatic duct drains lymph from the other three quadrants of the body. Waste products from the blood are then processed via the kidneys and liver to be excreted out through urine and feces. We begin the lymphatic system's organ observation in the tonsils, a synergistic network of 3 sets of lymphatic tissue patches that encircle the nasopharyngeal passages known as Waldeyer's ring. Lingual tonsils are positioned at the posterior portion of the tongue right before entrance into the pharynx or throat. Palatine tonsils, the most commonly thought of in this group, are situated posterior to the oral cavity, the mouth, and anterior to the pharynx bilaterally. The nasopharyngeal tonsils, or adenoids, is a mass of lymphatic soft tissue posterior to the nose in the superior posterior wall of the nasopharynx. Inferior to the Waldeyer's ring, in the superior anterior portion of the chest, just posterior to the sternum, is a thymus. 2 primary lobes with numerous smaller lobules compose the thymus structure. With an outer connective tissue capsule, a superior epithelial cortex containing keratinized cytoplasm, desmosomes, and lymphocytes, and a medial medulla structure that consists of less lymphocytes than the cortex. Reticular epithelial cells in the thymus are responsible for hormone production and secretion. Traveling down the body in the upper left quadrant of the abdomen is the spleen, a lymphatic organ posterior and lateral to the stomach. The spleen is yet another organ that has a biologically similar structure to the kidneys, as with the lymph nodes. The outer layer of the spleen, the splenic capsule, is composed of a thin yet durable layer of connective tissue. The capsule offers a thin layer of protection for the inner red pulp just inferior to the capsule. Separated into loosely divided sections by tubercula, composed of connective tissue and smooth muscle. The red pulp portion of the spleen contains sinusoids, highly vascularized, leaky capillary sinuses, and splenic cords, small divisional fibril structures that contain lymphocytes. Towards the center of the spleen is an additional less vascularized pulp called white pulp, which is a storehouse for lymphocytes and macrophages. Between the 2 layers is a small layer called the marginal zone, which is a deposit location for a large amount of antigens, where further immune response can be generated. The spleen receives blood from the splenic artery, which enters via the hilus of the spleen and exits through the splenic vein. In many depictions of pop culture bones, we often don't get to see the full awe of the working of the bones. Under the bone's surface resides spongy centers composed of myeloid tissues, commonly referred to as red marrow, and fatty tissue, commonly referred to as yellow marrow. The bones are vascular, with dense capillaries and blood vessels flowing through and into the bones. The spongy centers are surrounded by collagen fibers with calcium deposits that help strengthen the bone. The center part of the bone is the medullary cavity, where marrow is surrounded by the endosteum, a thin connective tissue lining, and the outer periosteum, a denser layer of vascular connective tissue. Lymphatic tissue seems to traverse areas in the body that require higher immune responses. These areas often contain mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, or MALT. The tonsils are examples where the MALT tissue is denser, as well as the appendix and Peyer's patches in the gastrointestinal tract. The appendix is a small tubule organ descending from the cecum of the colon. It is composed of a muscularis and serous tissue surround the outer portion, followed by a mucosa and submucosa inner lining containing MALT tissues. Peyer's patches are follicoid or lymphoid MALT tissues found in patches in the small intestine. These patches are mostly T-cell populated but contain B cells and macrophages in the germinal centers of the patch.